Okay, so now I want to stop and talk about working out the time aspect. So part of the planning process, or one of the very first steps in the planning process, is identifying what needs to be done, when it needs to happen, and who's going to do it. So the first component of that is really trying to identify what needs to be done and how long it's going to take. And that's really about managing task and time. So in terms of managing time in the project, it is about identifying the activities that need to happen for the deliverables to be achieved and for therefore the project objectives to be achieved. Then you need to determine what the sequence of those activities are going to be. So we know what the activities and tasks are. Now we need to think about what time requirements are needed so that they flow in terms of before and after. And then how much time do they require to be done? And putting all this together in some type of schedule or tool that can be used as a communication tool as well across all stakeholders, so that if I'm in the project team, I know what's going to happen when, and it's articulated in such a way that it's going to be consistent with what other people who are involved in that task or activities, they're looking at the document and they understand as well. So this is where some of our scheduling tools, which I'll talk about shortly, come into play. And this planning process becomes our planning baseline. So once we've undertaken the unpacking, and I'll talk about decomposition shortly, but once we unpack this, what needs to be done and who needs to do it and when it's going to occur and how long it's going to take, and we plan all that out so that it gets us to our final goal, that becomes our project baseline in terms of the planning process. And from there we build all the rest of it up from there. So there's a few things that a few tools that we can use to assist us with the planning process. So I'm going to talk about shortly the work breakdown structure, which is one of the main project management planning tools. But there's also things such as activity lists and Gantt charts, which we'll look at as well, and PERT charts. Not for this particular context, but in more complex projects. These are some of the tools that can be used to assist us with the planning process. So let's unpack the work breakdown structure first. The work breakdown structure, or WBS, is a hierarchical diagram that decomposes what needs to happen from a top-down perspective. So you take the project overall goal, you then identify the deliverables that need to be delivered as part of that project goal, and then you unpack the tasks or actions that need to occur to deliver on each of those activities and deliverables. So you break it down from the top down, and I'll give you an example shortly. And then once you've broken it down in terms of deliverables, activities, and tasks, you then build it up from the ground up in terms of time and costs. And I'll show you that shortly. So to develop a work breakdown structure, you get your project scope and any of the other documentation that can let you know about who needs to do what, or what needs to happen, or what are the deliverables. Any of those informational needs, the type of inputs that feed into the work breakdown structure, things like your project scope statement, requirements documentation, so that could be things like procurement requirements, organizational policies and procedures. And the thing that you get out of it, so the outputs that you get from your breakdown structure, are things such as the WBS itself, the baseline for your planning process, and then any documentation updates that need to occur from that. So for example, not only things like Gantt charts, but also rosters or schedules of timing, or delivery dates for execution of particular contractual arrangements and so forth. Okay, that's enough of the theory stuff. Let me show you what it looks like. So I'm going to show you a couple of examples. Here's one example. So this is an example of a project to develop a web application. And the web application in this case, this really simple breakdown structure, has got these key deliverables or activities at the top. Requirements gathering, so getting the requirements required for the job. Then 2, the design, so coming up with a design that's fit for purpose. Then 3, actually create the website. Then 4, to test the web application. 5, to then look at the hardware requirements. 6, to get the customer to accept the job. And 7, to wrap it up. So that top line, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, the key activities or deliverables. So we could actually put those in deliverable statements. So we're going to have some type of document for number 1 that outlines the requirements of the project. So we might call it the project requirement report is going to be a number 1 deliverable. And it's good to talk in terms of deliverable because it actually makes it tangible and pragmatic. It objectifies that statement a lot more in terms of makes it far more objective. 2, the design, it might be, we're going to come up with an illustration, a design, or a design plan, or whatever the tangible, how we're going to describe that tangible and so forth. So then each one of those deliverables from 1 to 7 then gets broken down into tasks. So for number 1, the key tasks that are going to have to occur for us to be able to gather the requirements for this job is that we need to have a look at the RFP response, we need to have a look at the hardware requirements, we need to have a look at the network requirements, and then the software requirements. And for the design, we need to look at the interface prototyping, we need to use case diagrams, we need to detail the use case diagrams, detailed use case diagrams, sequence diagrams, and class diagrams, and so forth and so forth. So we now start to break these down. And that's the first component of the work breakdown structure, where we start at the top. This is the project, and you can be as descriptive or as succinct as you want. These are the deliverables. That's the next level down of the hierarchy. And then we take each of those deliverables and we break that down to the level of degree that's within our scope of responsibility. Why do I say that? Well, because if you think about a shopping center, if we're building the next Westfield shopping center, you'll have an overarching project manager who has a very high level view of what needs to happen. But then at each of those levels, you've got a project manager who is responsible. So you have a project manager responsible for each of the deliverables. You'll have project managers who are responsible, or officers who are responsible for each of those tasks. And each project manager or officer will have a work breakdown structure or schedule that's within the scope of their work. So the big site project manager doesn't want to have to, on a day-to-day basis, micromanage the project officers. Everybody has their scope of responsibility. So for us in this case, and in the context of what I talk about, where we're ultimately responsible for all of the project, our decomposition or our breakdown of task activities would go down to the level of detail that we need so that we're clear about what needs to be done. So we break down, as we would with this diagram, we would break down all these deliverables and all these activities and tasks. So we would then consult as part of that process. We'd talk to people, we'd talk to the project team if they've got any experience. We have a look at any historical documentation. We might consult outside of the organization to industry. We may even consult some of our suppliers who may have quite a deep understanding of what we're trying to do with the project and be able to share some of the experience with us. So we undertake this decomposition. Once the deliverables and the tasks are unpacked, such as this, we then start from the bottom and we start to build up the time required to do it. So, and I'll go to the next slide to demonstrate this. So this is a different context, and this is not a complete, this is just a little snapshot from a house building work breakdown structure. And now I'm starting to include more information into each of these nodes. So if we look at the top one, the project, so this particular node up the top here, project, build a house, is the project purpose or objective. It's got a work breakdown structure code of 1, and it's got a cost here of 19,000. I don't know how you build a house for 19,000, but I suppose it's 2005. A bit different to current prices now. And then you've got the overall project manager. And then you've got these two examples here of deliverables. Build a skeleton and build the interior fittings, I should say. Hopefully not inferior. Interior fittings. And then we can unpack these deliverables. I'll work with the skeletal one. We can unpack this deliverable into main works 1 and main works 2. So let's say main works 1 might be, the skeleton might be about the foundation, and this one might be about I don't know, trusses or whatever you call the wooden frames. I'm sorry, I'm not a building expert. So we've decomposed like the previous slide. We've unpacked the project from the top down, and as part of that, we've gone. Let's see this one here where my mouse cursor is 1.1.1. Let's just describe this one as foundation. And then the blue one, which is subsequent, these are tasks that drive these, so broken down even further. This might be about digging out the foundation, and this might be about pouring the concrete. Now we want to build up the time and the cost from the bottom upwards. So where we've gone with tasks from top down, we start from the most, we start from the most micro task, and we go, okay, this particular task down here, work breakdown structure code 1.1.1, 1.1.1.1, which let's just say it's digging the foundation. When does it need to start? And sorry, this is international date stamping. So the example would be the 14th of the 4th. It starts and it's going to finish on the 30th of the 6th. And the total cost of that for this particular, for digging it out, once we've done our, got our quotes and done our research, is $356. Let's just assume that's dollars, $356. So that's the digging up. And that might be because we're doing it ourselves and that's just the cost of materials or what have you. The second work package, which is 1.1.1.2, which let's just say, whereas 1.1 is digging, this one is pouring the concrete or the cement. Let's just say, and I know that's really crude, but let's just say that for argument's sake. That's going to happen, my dates aren't going to work well here, but let's just say that's going to happen on the 12th of the 1st, and it's going to happen, and it'll start on the 12th of the 1st, and it'll conclude on the 2nd of February. That's going to cost us $656. So if they're the two tasks that are going to drive this activity, then we know then that this activity is going to be an accumulation of those costs, and it's going to span that time frame. So we know that this particular work package will commence on the 12th of the 1st because that's the earliest date. And we know it'll conclude on the 30th of June because that's the latest date. So for this package to be completed, the time frame is going to be from the 12th of January to the 30th of June. And we know it's going to cost $1,012 because that's an accumulation of those two costs there. And then if we do the same with 1.1.2 and then 1.1.2.1 and 1.1.2.2, and we build the costs and the times from the bottom up, and this is an accumulation, 1.1.2 is an accumulation of those costs and times, well then we know that the cost and the time for this deliverable here is an accumulation of the time and costs of these main work packages. So that's what I mean by this idea of we decompose the project from the top down and then we build the costs and the timing from the bottom up. And that's where the work breakdown structure has its greatest value because it helps us to identify the tasks or the activities and the tasks that needs to be done, but it also helps us to identify the time frame of these tasks, the time frame of these packages, and the time frame of these deliverables. So it becomes really powerful in helping us to just be analytical with what needs to be done and how we need to go about that and what it's going to cost and so forth. This information then feeds into our planning documentation, feeds into our schedules, and feeds into our budgets as well. And just to sort of break it down, like every work breakdown structure is modified to be fit for purpose. From a traditional theoretical perspective, these are the components that you'll find in a work breakdown structure. You'll have a code, and you'll see the code when I show you a Gantt chart later. You'll see that the code is really important in terms of being able to link information on a Gantt chart to the informational work breakdown structure, or any other documentation where we're taking info from one and putting it in the other. The code becomes important to help us to connect the dots. So the code becomes important. You'll have the task title or the deliverable, depending on what level of the plan it's at. You'll have the duration of the event or the activity. You'll have the costs. You'll have in terms of the duration, the specific start date and the end date. And you'll notice from this one here as well, it also has the name of the person who's responsible for this particular project, or this particular deliverable, or this particular activity, or this particular task. So you can this is an example of the type of information you could potentially find on a work breakdown structure. Now, if you're responsible for all those activities, if you're accountable for all the project, the deliverables, the activities and tasks, well, then you don't need to put your name on all those nodes. So you can modify it as required. And there are lots of ways that we can go about doing this, but I just want to show you this diagram just to sort of say one of the most common ways that we go about developing a work breakdown structure, particularly with a project team. So as a project manager, you want to get your team together, and if it's appropriate, and help them in terms of breaking down what needs to be done. One of the most popular ways is just simply with a couple of different packets of post-it notes and some markers, and getting the team together and saying, okay, what are the big chunks of work that we need to do? What for this particular deliverable or activity, what are the tasks that we need to do? How long do we need to do that? And this could go back and forth. So you might start first by estimating some time frames, and then going back and doing some further research and coming back and tightening those up. But post-it notes is a terrific, or whether it's a whiteboard or what have you. But post-it notes are a terrific way in which to do this, because it allows you to move things around as you're brainstorming and adding bits and taking bits out and shifting orders of things and so forth.